I love Grey's Anatomy. I probably have watched every season, all 14 of them, at least 3 times. I like to watch when I'm on a 28-hour flight. You know, you can like go through those really quick, makes the time click off. You know, I'm thinking, okay, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. And then sometimes when I'm at home just kind of doing nothing, sometimes I'll put those TV shows on just to kind of sends my mind to a different place. And with this particular clip, this was from the most recent one, so I'm not going to give too much of it away. But for those of you that were with us at Adore, yesterday morning Anna talked about the Enneagram, and actually Scott did an entire series on the Enneagram. And I am the 1. Okay, so the reformer, you know, she said she was a balloon and I was a string. And the strings, we always think, are trying to pull them down. You know, those 3s that are balloons just want to fly and just feel all the things, you know. And a lot of times 3s have a tendency to think that 1s are just trying to hold them down. But what we're trying to do is keep you from getting lost. And so my kids, it drives them crazy that I can do 5 things at one time. I'll be typing on my computer, I'll be listening to something on the phone, and then Grey's Anatomy is on. They don't feel like I'm giving it the integrity that it deserves. And so that's what was happening with this. And then I realized how closely aligned that particular clip was to something that I wanted to share with you today. And so it's of a powerful event that happened. That woman experienced a brutal rape. And so, as you can imagine, at that moment of trauma in her life, there's a part of her that just stops. And so what the doctors were doing, they were trying to get her through that moment and come face to face to it. And so they did that in the room of, you know, maybe after triage. And so as she began to unlock her story to the physician, that room became a place of safety. The only problem is that she needed to move from that room to a room to have surgery. And so what was happening is as they became to get into the depth of her story and she's talking through it, they realize they've got to get her out of the safety of that room. And so what happens as the physicians are talking through it, their solution became to provide a wall of protection down the hallway. A wall of protection. In this particular clip, it's a wall of women. And as I researched what made them try and decide to do and use women with that particular clip, is that these are not just extras in the, like, you know, they hired them to be extra actors. These are their producers. These are their makeup people. These are the people behind the camera, because they all wanted to be a part of that story of providing a safe haven for someone that needs them in their darkest moment. She could not move on her own. She was not going to move from that place of safety in that room to stepping out into the unknown. She needed surgery, but that place in between was never going to happen without someone to protect her from what was happening in her mind and in her heart. And so there are situations that are so horrific, that trauma that happens to us, things that happen that are disappointing, that are frustrating, and then physical pain, that it causes us to be totally and completely paralyzed. And at that moment, we are faced with a situation of such gravity that pushes us and keeps us down. Gravity would say you stay down. But the only way that you can defy that is by someone investing in your life. And so when we finally do, we are able to make it out of bed. We're finally able, after that trauma, to make it out of our house, to be able to walk out and see the sunshine again. We're still faced with the pain of what's happening to us. The gravity of pain prevents our growth. The gravity of pain prevents our healing. The gravity of our pain keeps us small, where we stay in a shallow place of relationship. A shallow place of relationship with one another. A shallow place of relationship sometimes with our local church. We don't want to get that involved because I've been hurt by church before. So I'm just going to stay really shallow. A shallow place with our family. Sometimes the deepest and darkest hurt comes from the place of the people who either raised us or we raise. And so those moments cause us to stay small, and they keep us very minimalized into the shallow of our life. The gravity of pain keeps you from moving forward. And so in order to defy gravity in your own life, defy gravity in your own career, defy gravity in your own profession, in your own family, that's what we want for you to be able to do, is defy gravity. You know, obviously this was, you know, these guys have talked about that. That's why you've got a Yellow Brick Road, is that this was from our conference and the decor. And so when we were trying to, Scott's in Iowa, if you're curious where he is. He is in Iowa, although you got plenty of him on that crazy video, didn't you? That he is teaching at a conference in Ohio. And when we were thinking about my goal for today to speak was to do a standalone message on something else. And as we were talking through it, you know, he said that the women that were here and experienced this for Adore, that was powerful, and it was powerful for them. But how much more significant would it be that their partner, that their spouse, their boyfriend, you know, whoever comes with them on Sunday would get to experience what they experienced. And so that's why we're just going to dive into that today. So I want you to defy gravity in your life, not just for me, but for all of you, for every female, for every male. We want you to do that. And there are ways we're going to defy gravity. And some of these ways, and what kept us down, and we're going to get out of that, is for a couple of purposes. The one first purpose I want to talk about is to become the person we were created to become. You have to defy gravity to become the person that you were created to become. Because when you are subdued, for whatever reason, through trauma, through abuse, through disappointment, you know, one of the things that is most difficult is to overcome disappointment. To have expectations that things were going to go that way, and then they end up going this way, can really send somebody like me into a really bad place. And so disappointment for me in my life has been one of the things that pulls me down the most. And so in order for me to defy gravity, I've got to go back to the place to know that God instilled something inside of me that I've got to rediscover. So we need to defy gravity. Another reason we need to defy gravity is to do the things that we were created to do. We all have a purpose. We all have a dream. We all have, if you say, marching orders. You know, from the time that we wake up to the time that we go to bed, there is something that is compelling you to do what you do. For some of you, it's just a paycheck. You absolutely do not like your job. You do not feel fulfilled. You don't feel like you're making a difference, but you have to have a paycheck in order to pay the bills at the end of the month. And that for you is existence. In order for you to defy gravity, you have got to figure out what your talents, your gifts, your dreams, all of those things that make you who you are, and that's what you need to be doing. And I always say that the thing that you think about before you go to bed at night that, you know, is just what makes you excited to be able to get up the next morning and do, or the things that you wake up first thing in the morning and your dreams and your passion, if you can figure out a way to get paid doing that, then you've been successful. You've been successful. And so I would encourage you to think about that. And then lastly, and the most important reason is to defy gravity, is to be able to live a life of freedom. When we are bound, when we feel like we're in a straitjacket and cannot get out of the vices that are preventing us from living our best life, there is no way that we're going to be the person we were created to become or do the things that we are created to do. So I hope to be able to kind of give you some strategies to live in freedom. Anybody else want to have a life of freedom? Yeah. You can raise your hand. I mean, I think I'm really interactive. You know, my background is education. And so I really like it when you move and you talk. It does not bother me at all. In fact, if there was somebody running across, you know, saying they had to go to the bathroom, I'd feel perfectly comfortable. You know, so no problems with that. Okay. And so the way, and so moving right along, that the importance of being able to be in charge of your story is to understand that we are the narrator of our story. We are the person that tells the world what we want them to know about our own lives. We are also the person, the language and the way that I talk to myself I am the narrator of my story, and I am going to be able to, depending on the way that I talk to me, is how if I'm going to be able to have success, or if I'm being really mean to myself, then I'm absolutely going to be kept in the shallow of my life. In shallow water, if you are a swimmer, or if you are, let's think about the ocean, that in the shallow part of the water is where you can see all the debris. You can see all the creepy crawly things on the ocean floor. You can, if there's going to be a jellyfish or something that's going to get you, that's where it's going to be most of the time, because there's not the depth to protect you. And so in order to really live in freedom, like in deep water, you've got to be willing to step off that ledge where you cannot feel what is underneath you. For some of you, just me saying that causes anxiety. Not knowing what's going to happen before you and what's going to happen behind you, that's there. But not going back to one of those two places is absolutely treacherous for you. But it is only in that place that you are really going to find freedom. Now, for those of you that are great swimmers, and it is awesome, you just love the thought of being out there in the deep water, the waves don't bother you, doesn't bother you that you can't touch the bottom. That feeling of freedom gives you life. Well, that is the same freedom that God wants for you. That is the same freedom for the way he wants you to live your life. And so that's our goal, is to get you to that place of freedom. So I want you to use your imagination, kind of think back in Scripture, go back 2,000 years ago, and think about a young woman that is living in a town that is very conservative. It is highly religious. There are people that have opinions about everything. It sounds a lot, like today, lots of opinions about everything. And she is known as the notoriously sinful woman. The girl that I'm talking about in Luke chapter 7, they don't even give her a name. She is just known as notoriously sinful. In every translation that I looked, she was called the sinner, the sinful woman, the person that was most known to be despised and rejected. She didn't even have a name, but sinner. And so, but the thing about her is that nobody knows her name, but everybody knows who she is. She's the person that is known to have sex with anybody that would want to have sex with her. And so she is a prostitute. She is selling her body. And the thing about her is that she is known for what she did rather than who she is. There are some of you that feel like that all people know about you is your past, is your mistake, or your mistakes. And so when you walk into a room, you're already armored up. You know you're going to get the stares. You know that people are going to look past you rather than look at you in the eyes, and you are ready for battle. Well, I imagine that's who she was and how she felt. But I'm going to tell you about something that happened in her life that totally transformed her so that she could move from a shallow place where she armored up to a place of depth where she totally became vulnerable. And so the thing, for me with this message and my goal is to help you realize that there is hope for you past the mistake. There is hope for you past the whatever this is. And so we're going to go to Luke chapter 7. If you have your Bibles with you or YouVersion, Luke chapter 7, verse 36, to kind of talk about her. And if I think about her in our current culture, so we've talked about her as the harlot, as the prostitute. In our current culture, you think about how you might look at this particular woman or this particular man. It's the person that had an affair with a married person. If you have an affair with somebody who is married, a lot of times you're going at the bottom of the totem pole. When people think about it, it's one thing to have an affair, but to have an affair with somebody who's married to somebody else, we automatically put that person in a category that's different than other things. That sinful person. Think about a person who is a stripper. We think, wow, if you're taking your clothes off for money, you must be that kind of person. What if someone, you meet them and they say that their profession is as an actor in pornographic movies? I mean, your mind is just going to all kinds of places. Well, that's exactly what happened when they looked at this woman. That's how she was known. So she was dirty and she was disgusting and all of that stuff. And then imagine being surrounded by religious men. So these were men that were the top of the top, as far as the religious scholars. And there's all kinds of things I want to say about our current culture of religion, but I absolutely am not going to. I just felt it all of a sudden. I'm just not going to do it. Luke chapter 7, verse 36. Let's go there. All right. One of the Pharisees asked him over for a meal. He went over, him is Jesus. He went over to the Pharisee's house and sat down at the dinner table. Just then, a woman of the village, the town harlot, the notorious sinful woman, the sinner girl, she, having learned that Jesus was a guest in the home of the Pharisee, came with a bottle of very expensive perfume, stood at his feet, weeping, raining tears on his feet. Letting down her hair, she dried his feet, kissed them, and anointed them with the perfume. How many of you have heard that story before? I'm just curious, all right? Just kind of want to know. So, the Pharisees, they were known as the religious scholars, as the people who, if you wanted to ask questions about Scripture as they knew it, those were the people you would ask the questions of. They had a very strict set of rules that originated with the 10 Commandments from the book of Exodus. And then from those 10 Commandments, they then created commandment after commandment after commandment after commandment, rule after rule after rule after rule from those 10 Commandments. And they had the most pride in knowing that they were able to keep them all. So when Jesus showed up on the scene, he broke so many of them, because he highlighted the fact that these were man-made rules. They were not maintaining the integrity of the 10 Commandments. They were rules in place that they put in, things that they put in place, systems, so that they could feel safe. It wasn't so that everyone around them could be successful and have a strong relationship with the Father, because that could have happened. But it was to keep people out, so much more so than to welcome them in. And so Jesus was breaking all kinds of that. Number one, that was probably top on the list of the no-nos, was eating with sinners. The meal, the beverages, it was so powerful. It wasn't like just going out, to Three Amigos and having a meal with your friends. Anytime you invited somebody into your home for a meal, it was highly honored. It was almost the utmost of respect for you to sit down and break bread and to drink and talk. And it was just so highly respected. And so one of the things that when that honored guest walked into your home, there would be, because they all wore sandals, there would be a basin of water so that the servant, the slave, could wash your feet. At the very least, if there was no servant or slave, it would be where you could wash your own feet to freshen, so that you would feel better about being in that person's home. Well, to read this chapter and go through, you'll realize that they offered none of that to Jesus. So he is considered a teacher. He is considered a religious scholar, but they totally disrespected him. They totally dishonored him by not doing that one thing. Jesus, he doesn't mind. He just moves right on in. And so I'm sure he just sat down with his dirty feet and said, okay, well, let's go for it. They didn't invite him to honor him. They disrespected him as soon as he walked in the door. They invited him to interrogate him, to figure out the things that it is that he's saying so they could catch him. And ultimately, is what would lead to his death and his murder. But we all know, Jesus is cool like that. He predicted it all anyway. He was not surprised. And so as they began to ask him questions, and I think about so much of that is kind of how we live in the church today. Some of the emails that Scott and I field constantly are things about people wanting to know, do you believe this is a sin? Do you believe that's a sin? Is this a sin? Why do you let people do like that at your church? And wait, it's the exact same thing. It's interrogating, trying to figure out so that they can feel better about whether or not they want to walk in our doors. So it's like, if you let all those people do all these things, I'm not going to be safe in there. Well, the truth is, you have to be responsible and individual for your own spiritual walk. No pastor needs to be able to tell you to do this, 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 and this. Because if that... There's no pastor that is Jesus. There is no pastor that needs to interpret law to you. We need to be able to create an environment where the same thing that can happen to you and your friends and your family that happened to her. And that's what we're going to get to next. So she hears that Jesus is in the home. The things she hears about, there are 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay, majority of them touch on this story. There are a lot of different kind of versions, that say who she is. Some people believe she was the prostitute that, Jesus came out and pulled her out, where they pulled her out of somebody's house, and then there were rocks, and he said, it wasn't her. And then there was somebody else who I actually believe she is an independent woman that is just totally different than all the rest of them. Because the rest of a lot of other, you remember Lazarus? You might have heard of him, rose from the dead after 5 days. We've done all kinds of stuff with that with Easter, if you were here for that. That it was Mary of Bethany, which was his sister. I don't really believe it was her either. I believe this is a woman that lived in the community that the Bible tells us that she heard that he ate and drank with people that looked like her, with sinners. They thought like her, they felt like her, and I believe she got up that day and knew that he was going, the rumor mill is going to be at this Simon Pharisee's house, and she was determined to at least go lay eyes on him. She had enough sense to know that if in fact he was as they described, then she needed to bring a gift to honor him. And what she did was collect probably the most valuable thing that she owned was that bottle of cologne and that bottle of perfume or that bottle of oil, whatever anybody wants to call it. And she was fully prepared to dispense it all at his honor. I think about it, she walks into that room, she walks into that house, and, I imagine that probably nobody even greeted her at the door because, she is a prostitute. And so she walks through, she is searching for the man who eats and drinks with people who look like her. And in the moment she finds him, she is so moved that she cannot even go in front of him. The Bible tells us she stands at his feet and behind him and is weeping. And the tears that she is flowing, it is more and more and more. And then as she begins to cry, there are so many tears, and that she notices, because obviously she's kneeling or, she's like, oh man, they didn't even wash Jesus' feet. Here I am here to anoint him, and his feet are filthy. And at that moment, I can imagine that Jesus moves her from behind and brings her face to face so that he can look at her. So he can look at her in the eyes. And as a prostitute, she had looked in the eyes of men over and over and over again. And you don't just wake up one day and decide to prostitute your body for money. We have absolutely no idea the background of this girl, the story, her childhood, the trauma that she endured. But at that moment, she looked into the eyes of a man that really saw her. I believe it could have been at that moment that she was seen for the first time. And that act of kneeling before him, these tears flowing, and she is just crying and weeping and washing his feet just with her tears. It became such an act of worship. Worship because she was loved. Worship because she was seen. Worship because she was valued. And I don't believe that she walked into that environment ready to be that emotional. I think that she came for the purpose of honoring the man who ate with people like her. She just wanted to see him, if he was real, if he was really that loving. And so her goal was to take the cologne and the perfume to anoint it. And to anoint someone was to, put oil on their head and to just really lavish them with that. But it ended up being that she was able to wash his feet and anoint that. It was such a a act of humility in worship. And so the thing that's so amazing is that you read on through the passage is that Simon, the Pharisee who owned the home, the Bible tells us he thought in his mind, he did not say it, that if you only knew who she was, you would not let her touch you. And so obviously Jesus, perceiving his thoughts because he is God, he looked at him and then began to tell him a story of two particular, guys that owned land, owned money, owned all kinds of stuff. And basically he says, okay, so these two guys have debt. This one guy, let's say it's $50, whatever. This next one, it's like $500,000. But I decide I'm going to forgive them of both. So that's all Jesus says. He asked Simon, he looks at him, this is a question. He said, who would appreciate the gift and pardon more? Simon's clear. Well, the guy with $500,000. And then he equates the two of them. You are he. She is the one that appreciates the greatest gift. And I am receiving her worship. And so all of that, the emotion and the power, is what is causing her to have the courage to move from a shallow walk. I think with every step, she's getting a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper so that she can find her way into that relationship with Jesus. And so the thing about it, she didn't come in with this concept of ready to wash his feet. Because I think if she had, she would have brought a towel with her. She brought perfume. So wouldn't she have brought a towel, ready to wash his feet? Of course she would have. She would have been prepared. She was not prepared for the degree of brokenness that she was going to feel in looking into the eyes of someone who accepted her and had seen her for the first time. I've tried to imagine as I've thought and prepared for this message about the degree of brokenness that I would feel. I talked to you about the deepest trauma for me a lot of times has been my disappointment, with unrealistic expectation for me, and that how hard that has been for me to overcome. Well, this poor girl, she was disappointed by every person that had ever said that they loved her, most likely. And so to finally look into the eyes of someone, of course she's going to cry. Of course she's going to be moved. Martin Luther calls her tears heart water, because they came so from the depths and the core of who she is as she was overwhelmed. She is so broken. So at that moment, I've told you about these religious thoughts, these religious perceptions. There is a book of rules called the Talmud, and that a lot of them use. Again, it was created outside of like the Old Testament rules. And in the Talmud, it said that when a woman took down her hair, that it was the equivalent of taking off her shirt. And so for her to take her hair down, it was such an exposure. And at that moment, she was actually risking her life. Because based on their rules, she could then be ripped out and stoned to death. Just that one act. And because you were only to take your hair down with your spouse. So she was risking everything to move from shallow to deep. A little bit deeper, so that she could come face to face with her Creator. She was risking it all. And so I've asked Amber and Dale to come sing a song that explains that power of moving from shallow to deep and the sacrifice that happens when you make that jump to live totally free.